The topic of this tape is why believe your thoughts. And this thought came to me many years ago. I'm sure, like me, you were brought up in a family that taught you to have certain beliefs, ways of acting, living your life. And probably you were brought up not knowingly, but the message was whatever's in your mind is part of you, therefore you must believe it. And so as we get older, whatever comes into our mind, we tend to believe it. And having worked in the field of the yoga philosophy, the vision of oneness, and doing the work of meditation, I've really come to see that because a thought is in my mind doesn't necessarily mean that I need to believe it. So I sit here now and I want to share some thoughts with you, and hopefully they'll spark you to think a little bit. And that's really what I'd like you to do. I would like you to sit back for a moment and really look at your mind and look at the thoughts that come into your mind and notice how there's someone sitting back there observing the mind, observing the thoughts. And in fact, we do have the power to decide if we want to act on a thought or not. We do have the power at any given moment to observe a thought and decide if that is our truth. So we start off with a basic question. And the question has been asked many times, who am I? So we're starting off sitting here, listening to the tape, thinking about what's being said, but who is that person? Who is the person who's sitting and thinking? Who is the person who's sitting and noticing? Who is the one who observes your whole life? So right now, if I asked you, you could think about yourself as a child. And then I could ask you, well, what was it like in high school? And then ask you questions about, well, what was it like when you were in college if you went? And each of you would have an idea that would come into your mind, a memory. You'd have an awareness. So here you are as a child, and right now you can remember parts of that life. And then you were a youngster, and you can remember that, and a teenager, and a young adult. Who was the person who was present, even though the body was young and now the body's older? And at one point you had certain thoughts in your mind. Let's say maybe even this week at some point you were disturbed. Another time during the week you were happy. Who is that person who knows that? That's our starting point. So the philosophy of oneness, the Vedanta philosophy, teaches us that there is a being within us. And that being is not a mental being. And that being is not a physical being. That being is awareness. And so the I that we're speaking about is what is called the observer self, the knower self. And it's that part of us that is always alert. It's always awake. It's always living in a state of freedom. Never is it bound. That I is where we place our attention. That's the starting point. So as awareness, we are always free. Now, certainly in my life, I know there are times when I don't experience freedom. So what happens then? What's going on that I don't experience freedom? Right? So something, as I observe it, something happens within my mind. Something occurs inside my head. My mind thinks some thought, whatever that thought might be. And I put my attention on it. And I become that thought. And then I get disturbed. But throughout it all, there's still a part of me which is just watching, is just observing. So the I that we're speaking about, that's where we want to place our attention. That I am state, that pure consciousness state. So within all people, every single person, there is a reality, there is a dimension which is blissful, is awake, is aware, and is always in a state of observing. Now, what does it observe? It observes whatever the mind is doing, and it observes whatever the body's doing. But that observing part, That knower self, we call it also, is present within everyone. So, the thought that I would like to start the tape off with is the thought that we are not our thoughts, that there's someone else there. Now, this was a very radical thought when I first heard it. I liked it. There was something about it that attracted me, absolutely. But the thought that I was more than what was on my mind, especially the condition of my mind at the time, I was very happy to find that out. So I would like you to think about that. That just because a thought comes into your mind doesn't necessarily mean, number one, that it's the truth, and number two, nor does it have to be acted on. Now, certainly as we grow older and we learn about self-control and we learn about self-discipline, we realize that because my mind may say after a delicious meal that it wants to have a huge dessert, and my stomach really doesn't want it, I can listen to that thought and say, no, I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm going to act on that. For some people, though, they don't have that power. If a thought comes in the mind that says, I want dessert, well, immediately then the dessert is probably in the mouth and in the belly before you can even breathe a second breath. So the thought is, I am that being. I am that consciousness. I am that awareness. I am more than just a physical body, and I'm much more than the thoughts in my mind. So we introduce then the thought that consciousness is who I am. Awareness is who I am. That consciousness and that awareness certainly enters into the mind, certainly creates thoughts and perceptions and ideas, but it's important to know that that's not who I am. I am the one who is the observer of the mind. That's the first basic tenet. And it's very important to go into that. I am not saying that you are not the mind. I'm saying you are greater than the mind. I'm not saying you don't have a mind. Of course, we all have minds. We all have thoughts, emotions, and beliefs. However, we are the ones who are in power. We are the masters of the mind. We are the observers of the mind. And the thoughts that go into the mind, the thoughts that the mind creates and produces, aren't always necessarily the truth, nor are they necessarily the thoughts that we want to live by. And until we begin to recognize that I am more than that I exist as awareness, as a conscious being who uses the mind, I will not be free. And as I grew into this understanding, I began to realize that every human being wants to be free. They want to experience some state of expansion, of peace, some state of blissfulness. And if you look at your life, I'm sure you'll find that you also want that. Then we come into a very important point, which is what can we do in order to experience that peacefulness? What is it that we need to do in order to live a conscious, awake life where we can feel good about ourselves? In order to do that, we have to realize where the peace, where the happiness, and where that bliss lies. For many of us, we were taught at a very young age that if you live a certain life, let's say if you get a job, a certain type of job, earning so much money, if you have a certain type of relationship, if you have a partner in your life, then you'll be happy. And then you might have also learned that if you got a certain education, were able to perform at a certain level of intelligence, then you'll be happy. But for those of us who have been really observing and studying in this field of meditation, we found that that's not necessarily the truth. Certainly it's wonderful to have a partner that you love. Certainly having financial security is wonderful. Certainly having an intelligence present to you so that you can live your life in a state where you can interact and enjoy yourself is great. But that does not necessarily bring you to a state of oneness. It doesn't necessarily give you what you're looking for. So what we're finding out is that the awareness that we bring to our life, the awareness that we bring to our mind, that is what we've all been looking for. The peace, The joy and the happiness that every human being is looking for is their own true nature. It's who they are. They have always been that, and they will always be that. It's the part of them that never changes. And as we said earlier on, that when you were young, who was there? Who was present so that right now you can remember yourself as a youngster? And who was present when you were a teenager? It wasn't the body, it wasn't that mind, because that's changed dramatically, I'm sure, since back then. But you can remember that. So there was an awareness present. There always has been an awareness present within you. That's where we place our attention. We place our attention not so much on the contents within the mind, but we place our attention on the being and the awareness that enters into that mind. Now, I know this is a completely different way of looking at it. This is not something that we were taught in school. This isn't something that even probably our philosophy classes we learned in college. But it's a very important point. Because unless you understand that you exist always in freedom, that you exist as consciousness, you exist as a wise being. I think of that statement that Jesus made when he said, I and the Father am one. And unfortunately, many people interpret that to believe that it was the body, Jesus, and the personality, Jesus, that he was speaking of. And I firmly believe that, in fact, he wasn't speaking of that. He was speaking of the I amness. He was speaking of the consciousness that he was. So he wasn't speaking about his thoughts and his personality and his physical body. He was speaking of that consciousness that he knew he was. And that consciousness is always one with God. That's a very, very powerful statement to make. Because he was convinced, I'm sure, that the contents of his mind was not who he was. He knew he was more than that. So in the same way, through meditation and through understanding what the mind is, through understanding who is the self, who are you? I mean, I know you've probably heard that statement before, but think of it for a moment. Who am I? Am I this personality? Am I this person speaking right now? Or am I the conscious being who is aware that I'm speaking? Who's aware of what I'm saying? Who's aware of the friends who are sitting in front of me, listening to the tape? So it means a shift in the way we think. It means a shift in the way we understand ourselves. If you're not knowing that you are an aware being, if you're not knowing that you exist in a dimension, on a level that is beyond the mind, that you exist as a conscious being, and then you enter into this mind and you gather together thoughts and beliefs and ideas and concepts, and we call that your personality. So in this philosophy, there's an understanding that your mind is a vehicle, or it's an instrument. It is an instrument in the same way that a pen is an instrument that you use to write. So you pick up the pen and you write. So you may write a letter to a friend and you say, Dear friend, I'm so happy that I have an opportunity to communicate with you, and I want to let you know how much I love you. The friend doesn't call you up on the phone and say, I want to tell this pen how much I'm grateful and thankful for that statement. The friend comes right to the source. It comes to you. And it says, thank you for writing such a beautiful letter. I appreciate it. And of course, the opposite is also true. If you're in a little bit of a depressed state and you write a letter to someone and you may not be so loving and nice, they don't write back or call you up on the phone and say, gee, that wasn't a nice letter, pen. They don't discuss it to the pen. They go right to the source and they say, gee, you must have not been feeling so well to write a letter like that. In the same way, your mind is an instrument. You use it. You are the power. You are the consciousness. You are the awareness. You are the intelligence. And you bring that to your mind. So then you use your mind in order to communicate, in order to gather information, in order to conceptualize, in order to write poetry, in order to write love letters. You use the mind because it's an instrument that allows you to communicate with others. But the mind is not who you are. Think about that for a moment. It's a new thought for many, I'm sure. But do you know that you are a very wonderful being? And depending on what's in your mind, you will either experience that or not. For example, if you just take the hypothesis that you are consciousness, you are awareness, you are a free being, infinitely pure. If you take that thought and then think for a second, well, why is it sometimes I suffer? If in fact it's true that I am a conscious being, well, how come I suffer then? Well, we can take this another step now. If in the contents of the mind there are disturbing thoughts, when you, the conscious being, enter into that instrument or vehicle, just like you sit in a car, so you enter into the mind, and if the mind is filled with negative thoughts, unless you are very aware, you will probably get caught up in those negative thoughts. For example, all of us have different happenings in our life where we get disturbed. And then maybe one day we work with someone and they help us step back from it and observe it and say, well, look at that. I don't have to get disturbed by that. What I can do is I can remain myself even when those thoughts are in my mind. That's what we're talking about. Through the practice of meditation and through understanding this philosophy, you come to know that whatever is in your mind are just passing waves. Now, those passing waves have nothing to do with you. So imagine you're sitting on a beach and one of those airplanes go by that are dragging a sign behind it, right? Advertising. And it's dragging and the sign says, "You are not a good person." Be a horrible sign to put on a plane, but let's just imagine it happened. Here you are sitting on the beach looking up at that sign. Now, is anyone going to get disturbed by that? Hopefully not. If you recognize that you're okay and you're sitting on the beach and you're observing that passing wave of a sign, there's no problem. If you forget, if you forget that you're the one that's sitting on the beach looking at the sign, and you take that sign and you bring it inside you, and you live that feeling that I'm not a good person, then you get disturbed. So depending on the different thoughts that are in your mind, and depending on how aware you are, do you know that the thoughts in the mind have nothing to do with you? They're just waves, passing waves in the mind. Once you know that, you're able to step back from it. You're able to look at it in an entirely different way. Then you know that you are the one who can choose whatever thoughts you want to choose. Granted, that's an advanced state, but in actuality it can be attained very quickly once you understand the basic premise. So the first point to remember is, I am awareness. I am consciousness. I am always connected to that higher power. I don't exist as an individual merely experiencing loneliness and separation. That I am always connected to a place inside of me that allows me to experience fulfillment and satisfaction and joy and love, no matter what is happening on the level of the mind. This is the first step. The second point to remember then is that your mind, in fact, is a vehicle that you use. So you get into a car, you drive your car to the destination, and then you get out of the car. Well, in the same way, we wake up in the morning, and we leave that blessed state we were in during the night. We come into the mind, which we call the waking state. And when we enter into the mind, just like you enter into a car, you then begin to think. You then begin to perceive. You then begin to use the mind. If you remain aware and if you remain awake, no matter what's going on in the mind, you realize that is a functioning of the mind, but not you. That definitely will help you. Now, there are techniques that'll help you to step back from your thoughts and recognize your thoughts and look at your thoughts. But what we're doing on this tape, in this program, is we're beginning to think about our mind in a completely different way. So because you have a thought in your mind, you no longer have to believe it. You can step back and realize it's just a passing wave. But let me warn you of something. The mind is very convincing. When the mind thinks something, it's got a great publicity team. And they have a way of convincing you absolutely that whatever's in your mind is the truth. That's the nature of the mind. So unless you've practiced in being able to step back and observe your thoughts, recognize what thoughts are in your mind, you probably will believe whatever it is that's in your mind at any given time. Then that creates a lot of problems. So as we begin to develop a new understanding about this mind, we also then have the potential to establish a new relationship with the mind. For most people, they haven't had the opportunity to really think about this. They haven't been exposed to this way of looking at it. So for most people, whatever the mind thinks, whatever comes up emotionally, whatever they feel, as they say, the gut feeling, they believe it to be true. That's the basic problem with human nature, that we've been trained to believe everything that comes into our mind to be true. And we've practiced that for so long that it's a new idea, and it's going to take some time and some practice to be able to change that tendency. But because you think something, it doesn't mean it's true. Because you feel something, now I'm really getting into an area that can be tricky. Because in the 70s, we were taught, follow your feelings. If you feel something, it must be true, and go with it. But yet, if we step back now and realize feelings are an outcome of what's in your mind. Emotions are a part of what is going on, how you think, how you organize yourself. So just because you feel something, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is the truth. Just because you have some type of a gut feeling about something doesn't mean it's accurate. There's another part of us that needs to be awakened and stimulated, and that's the part we call the observer self. The part of you that is always watching, the part of you that's alert, intelligent, aware, and wise. This is not the part of you that's within your mind. This is the part of you that we're calling the conscious part of you, the self, the I am state. So there is part of you that does know. There's no doubt about that. However, by the time the mind gets a hold of some information and turns it and changes it and slants it and colors it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to represent the truth. As a matter of fact, for most people, very seldom does it represent the truth. It just becomes another experience that they're having, which is colored by their own belief system. So we have to then begin to practice some techniques, put some time in, so that we can get in touch with this wise part of ourself. It's important that we take some time to practice observing thoughts, because you're hearing it, and many of you might be agreeing with it. However, this is just a theory. So when I say to you, why are you believing your thoughts? Yeah, you stop for a moment, you look at that and say, well, that's an interesting thought. Why believe my thoughts? Because it's my thoughts. Therefore, it has to be right. And now all of a sudden you're hearing someone say, wait a second now, you might want to question that. I remember when I was growing up and was a hippie back in the 70s, the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, we had a great slogan that was on our bumpers of our cars, which was question authority. Just because someone says it's true, that doesn't mean you should believe it. If a politician says something, thank goodness now we're all, developed enough to know that that doesn't necessarily mean it's the truth. Well, in the same way where we used to say question authority, question your mind. Bring in awareness, discrimination. Let the intelligence that's within you question the mind and see if in fact that's a thought you want to live with, if that's a belief you want to hold true in your life. But in order to do that, you have to awaken the part of you which can step back from the thoughts and witness and look at the thoughts. So even right now, let's practice an exercise which will help you to understand what this is about. So as you're listening to the tape, just close your eyes for a moment and take a few slow, deep breaths. So breathe in deeply through the nose, and then as slowly as possible, breathe out through the nose. So breathing in and slowly breathing out. It'll take about 5 or 6 of these breaths to allow you to go into a meditative state of consciousness. So breathing in and then very slowly breathing out. Now, as you do this, observe your breath. Notice the body taking deep breaths. And as you observe the breath going in and out, notice if there are any passing thoughts. We mentioned those before, passing waves. So observe that. Notice, observe the breath, and notice if there are any thoughts in your mind. Now, as you concentrate on the breath, your mind is beginning to become calm. There may be many thoughts that pass through it, many waves that pass by. Yet, because you're concentrating on the rhythmical, relaxing flow of your breath, automatically your mind is beginning to slow down. Now, this is a very important step. The calmer the mind, the more relaxed the body, the more you will begin to be aware of the part of you which exists free from the mind and free from the body. So breath is flowing. Notice how your shoulders are dropping. Notice how your belly, your abdomen is softening. Notice how your jaw is relaxed. Have your teeth apart and your lips touching as you continue to breathe in and out through the nose. Now your thoughts are becoming less frequent. So be in touch with the part of you which is observing your breath. This takes some concentration now. This isn't that easy. Notice that there's a part of you which is sitting back, observing the thoughts in the mind, observing the movement of the breath, and it's uninvolved with it all. This is what we call awareness, consciousness, self. This is the part of you which is always connected to that higher power, always connected to God. This completes side A. When you're ready, you can turn over to side B. I'm sure that all of us, at some time or another, have come to notice that certain thoughts disturb us. And we're also aware that there are certain thoughts that make us feel good. The traditional one, I think, in our society is on Monday thinking, oh my goodness, I've got a whole week ahead of me. And that usually doesn't bring about a high feeling. And then Friday comes along and everyone's conditioned to say, oh great, thank God that it's Friday. And they start feeling good again. So unfortunately, we have been brought up in a society that has taught us to be dependent on our thoughts in order for our experience of happiness and of course also our experience of depression and sadness. So for most people, the contents of their mind determines how they feel, determines how they experience life. Now that's very sad, because if you are in fact dependent on what you think in order to experience your highs and your lows, you are in a very precarious situation. Because I don't know about your mind, but I do know my mind, and it changes all the time. The nature of the mind is to think. And that's why for some people, when they begin meditation, and they may get a meditation teacher that says to them, well, in order to meditate, you have to stop your mind from thinking, which is the most impossible thing. There has never been a meditator ever that could stop their mind, because the mind is designed to think. It's what it does. We kid about it often, and we'll say, imagine telling your little 2-year-old that you should be quiet and sit and meditate. Well, it's not the nature of the 2-year-old to sit and meditate. It's their nature to play and run and explore and have a great time in the world. So unless you have come to know that you are not the mind, that you are a conscious being who uses the mind in order to express yourself and in order to communicate, gather information. Unless you know that, then what happens is you're going to be going on a roller coaster ride called life. And you won't have any control over it. One moment you're happy because you have happy thoughts in your mind. The next moment you're unhappy because some unhappy thoughts just happen to roll into the mind. So this philosophy and this practice is extremely important for every human being, because it's very important that you know your power. It's extremely important that you begin to recognize who you are truly or essentially. And then your relationship with your mind will change dramatically. There's a way of explaining this that might help you understand what I'm saying. If you understand how a projector works, okay, so a projector, if I can simplify it, is a box that has a light in it. And then there's some film that passes over the light. The light passing through the film then projects out onto the screen a movie. Now, the consciousness that we've been talking about, or the awareness that you are, that part of you that was observing your breath and observing your mind in the exercise we did on the other side of the tape, that's the light. So that would be represented by the light bulb in that box. Now the film that passes in front of the light, that would be your mind. When the light goes through the film, it then projects the film out onto a screen. That becomes your life. That becomes your relationships, your interactions. That's the world. So that's your interactions in the world. Now, depending on the film that's passing in front of the light, pretty much that's going to determine what's projected out there. I mean, that's understandable. If you have a film on which says, I'm not a good person, well, that conscious light, which is unaffected by that particular thought or that film, but yet the light passes through that film and it becomes, I'm not a happy person. And then next thing you know, you're living in the world and you're finding that all your interactions are creating problems for you and you're not a happy person. And we know that people who don't believe in themselves tend not to perform very well. People who don't feel that they're special and that they're a loving, kind person tend to be gossipy and mean and tend not to be a kind, loving person. So the contents of the mind get projected out into the world due to the force of the light. So the consciousness, the awareness that you are, when it enters into the mind, if it can remain aware of who it is, it can then activate thoughts and perceptions which will always create harmony and peace for you. Now, for the person who does not yet know who they are, for the person that believes they are the mind, the different thoughts that pass in front of them, they'll automatically believe those thoughts. For that person, I say, please stop for a moment and question, why should I believe this thought? If you have a thought that you're not a good person, why should you believe that? It's just a thought. It's not the truth. That's what I would tell this person. Of course, they might fight against me, and they may say, no, 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 I'm not a good person. And I'll say, why? And they'll say, because look at all the things I've done in my life. And I'll say, well, if you have that thought, and if you project that thought out into the world, well, probably that's why you've done those things. But you are that light. You are that conscious being. You are that immortal, blissful being. You are the knower self or the observer self. And the contents of the mind is not who you are. So don't believe that thought. Don't believe the thought that you're not a good person. Step back from it. You're the observer of that thought, and that's not the truth. So the first step in beginning to recognize that the mind is not who you are, and you don't have to believe the thoughts that are in your mind. And I want you to really know that. That's important. Just because you think something, it doesn't mean it's true. Just because you perceive something, it doesn't mean it's true. So we joke about the person who's been drinking and sees the pink elephants. But that person sees pink elephants. Please know that. They're not making it up. They're seeing a pink elephant. Why? Because in their mind, that thought exists, and that's what they see. That's what they feel. So because you're thinking a thought, the first step is step back from that thought. Who is it that's observing the thought? That's the most important point that I can share with you. Who is it that knows you're unhappy? Who is it that knows that you're feeling a certain way? And as soon as you get used to thinking this way, after you've listened to the tape a few times, you begin to contemplate this point. You are the one who's observing your own mind. Are you not the one who knows when you're happy? Are you not also the one who knows that when you're unhappy? Even when you wake up in the morning, you said, oh, I had a good sleep. Well, who was there to know you had a good sleep? Someone was awake. Someone was aware. So awareness you are. And that aware person that you are needs to be present whenever there's a thought in your mind. Please, starting today, starting this moment, question every thought you have. Do you want that thought in your mind? Do you want to believe that thought? Does that thought make you happy? Does that thought expand you? Does that thought bring you close to your loved ones? Does that particular way of thinking bring peace and harmony in your life? And unless you have practiced these techniques, and unless you can step back from your mind, and please know it takes a lot of practice. It's something that isn't not just going to happen overnight. Just imagine, how many thoughts have you had in your lifetime thus far? Right? So in order to awaken this aware part of you, it's going to take practice. But this is where it starts. It starts by sitting back for a moment and saying, I am not feeling well right now. Let's say that's the example. So you just happen to be in a slightly depressed state. We all get into those. Those are not uncommon. I think it's part of the human condition. And so you step back and you notice, gee, I'm feeling a little down today. Most people, because they're feeling down, are going to believe that that's who they are. What I'm suggesting is don't believe it. Now, I'm not saying that the feeling isn't there. It's there. You're feeling a little down. But don't believe that that's who you are. That's just a thought in your mind. Now, I don't mean to downplay it, because I understand, and I've had many thoughts in my mind that I've gotten disturbed. But what is very necessary for you to understand is, even if your mind is disturbed, it's not who you are. Then who am I? If I'm not supposed to believe my thoughts, if in fact you're telling me I'm not the thought, then who am I? You are the observer of that thought. You're the one who's sitting there noticing that the mind is a little depressed. But you are not depressed. And as a matter of fact, something very wonderful happens as you observe your mind and you don't believe that that's who you are. So you step back from it. As soon as you step back from the mind, as soon as you begin to observe your thoughts, they begin to change. So the point that we're making is that you are the awareness. You are the intelligence. You are the wisdom, not the thoughts in the mind. The thoughts in the mind, if they reflect your wisdom, they will be wise thoughts. If there's a clear connection between you and the mind, then the intuitive sense that you are will reflect itself through intuitive thoughts. But it's not necessarily true that any thought is wise or any thought is intelligent. So as you become more aware that your mind is an instrument and a vehicle that you're using, as you begin to see that it's just a film that's placed in front of the projector's light, and that's what's being projected out in the world. As soon as you recognize that, you can then direct the different thoughts, believe the thoughts that do reflect the wisdom of your own higher self, and you can step back from the thoughts that you know do not reflect it, and you don't have to believe those thoughts. If thoughts create oneness, if thoughts create harmony, if thoughts allow you to expand beyond the limitations of your own personality and identity, if thoughts connect you to God, to your higher power, then those thoughts are very wise thoughts. Those are thoughts which are a reflection of your higher power, a reflection of your own divine self. Those are the thoughts that are going to create oneness for you. They're wonderful. That's putting a film before the projector, which is a joyful, happy film. However, we need to awaken the observer self. We need to awaken the part of us that is wise, that is aware. So when thoughts enter into the mind, or when those waves pass by, and they create contraction, smallness, separation, pain, suffering, then we can observe those thoughts and say, no, I'm not going to believe you, thought. That's not a thought that I want to entertain or hang out with. Now, as soon as you've reached that state of awareness, consider yourself to be close to enlightenment. Because now you've awakened, or you've enlightened the part of you. You've awakened the part of you that is very wise. That's not the mind. That is your own self. So you exist always. You have never lost connection with that part of you. You enter the mind and allow thoughts to occur. You enter into your physical body and activate your brain and nervous system and senses so that you can connect with the world. It's you who's in control. And if you're not there, the body can't work. If you're not there, your mind can't work. So it's because of you, it's your power, it's your greatness. It's your connection to God that allows the mind to think. You open the car door and get in and drive the car. The car can't drive without you. You're the driver. So in the same way, you are the driver of the mind. And it's important to recognize and realize that with practice, you can become so established in that part of you that as you enter into the mind and create thoughts, you can use your discrimination. You can decide if that's a thought you want to hang out with or not. You have that power right now. I really want to let you know that. This isn't something that you have to try to find. It's there already. All you have to do is begin to start to quiet your mind, relax your body, and place your attention on that part of you. Just think for a moment. How old are you? How many years have you been on this planet? How many years have you been thinking? How many of those thoughts have you thought from a place where you were just observing them and noticing them? How many times have you just sat back and observed your thoughts? Probably not that often. Unless you've had the good fortune to be practicing this philosophy and this practice of meditation, probably for a good deal of your life, whatever thought came in your mind, that's what you became. And as we said before, how many millions of thoughts go through the mind in the course of a month? Many. And so how many times have you changed? If you believe your thoughts. If you know that you're not the thoughts, that the thoughts are just little waves in the mind, if you know that you are the awareness, you are the peace, you are the wisdom and the knowledge, and you bring that to your mind, well, that's a whole different happening then. So we are saying, I am definitely wanting to communicate with you that the satisfaction that you are searching for with the mind and with your body is your own true nature. You'll never find it in the world. Sure, you're going to find little moments of pleasure and you're going to find little moments of peace, but just mere moments, because it'll change quickly. We have a little saying that we use to describe the mind in the world. We call it the ever-changing field. So watch your mind. How long do you hold one thought? Watch your body. All right, I look at my body and say, my goodness, this has changed a lot over the years. The ever-changing body. So the whole physical world, the whole mental world is ever changing. It doesn't remain the same. But there is something that is constant. There is something that in fact never changes. And you know what? I'm not going to say it's the mind. So what is it? It's you. Not your personality you. Not your physical you. It's you as that awareness. And when you experience that part of you directly, what you experience is a profound sense of okayness, of peace, satisfaction, fulfillment. We call it bliss. So in order to experience that bliss, the body relaxes, the mind begins to relax and calm down, so the agitated thoughts get less and less. And you place in that mind positive thoughts. Positive thoughts calm the mind. A calm mind becomes a clear reflection of that blissful and peaceful self. And that's why every time that your mind is calm, you begin to experience a state of peace or satisfaction. It's not that the mind is satisfied, because the mind is a thought field, remember, and it's going to be thinking and changing all the time. But it will be because it reflects clearly who you are. If you think of the mind as a lake, if the lake is agitated, you can't see down to the bottom of the lake. Let's say you drop something. It's just a few feet deep. And you drop your ring. and the lake is agitated. You look down, you're not going to be able to see it. But if the lake gets calm, then you're going to be able to look down through the lake and look down and find what you've been looking for. In the same way, when you begin to practice meditation, relaxation, as you begin to learn how to calm the mind, when you learn not to believe the thoughts that agitate you, when you begin to realize that you are much more than the thoughts in your mind, then the lake of the mind becomes calm. And as that lake of the mind becomes calm, you begin to experience who you are. And you are an aware being. Your mind changes, but you never change. That's why you can remember yourself as a child, because you were there with that small little body and with that developing little mind. You were present. And that's why when you were a youngster, you can remember a body a little bit bigger and a mind that was thinking in a different way, because it was the same you. It was the same awareness. And even now, this many years old, with how many thoughts logged behind you in your lifetime, you still exist. Your body has changed. Your beliefs, your ideas, your thoughts have changed daily, minute by minute. But you have never changed. I knew a woman, 90 years old, and she said something to me that touched my heart. This was many years ago when she said it. She said, I look down at this body, and it's hard to believe, because I haven't changed. And she said, I look at the beliefs, and I used to be a Democrat, and now I'm a Republican, and I used to like this food, and now I like that food. She said, on that level, my mind has changed, but yet I'm still here. And I have a sense of myself as being unchanging. Well, I just loved sitting next to that woman because it was so beautiful. And now I understand why. You are that conscious being. You are never born. Your body's born. You never die. The body dies, this we know. Thoughts are born, thoughts die, they come and go all the time. But there is a part of us that is unchanging, peaceful, clear. It's the part of us that is always connected to God. It is the part of us that is aware and expanded. It's the part of us that when we look into someone else's eyes, we see that this is my brother, this is my sister. It's the part of us that gives us the experience which we'll call oneness or harmony or union. It's such a wonderful life when we know that we're not the mind. It's such a fearless life when we know that we're not the body. It's hard to name what that is. It's easy to say, not the body, not the mind. The words really don't describe what it is, so I'm asking you now to get in touch with it, because each of us knows it. We know that there is a part of us which is free. We know there's a part of us which is always in a state of expanded blissfulness, satisfaction and fulfillment. That's the part of us we have to place the attention on. And when we're established in that part of us, we then look at this mind and say, oh my goodness, look at this mind. Look at this thought. Where did that come from? And we no longer believe a thought just because it's passing across the screen of the mind. We now are living our life from an awakened place, from an aware place. We can look at that mind and chuckle about it. I once worked with a person, and I was doing some meditation and relaxation work with this man because he was very disturbed. And through the course of our meditation work, he said to me, I have thoughts of committing suicide all the time. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, I've had those thoughts too. And he looked at me with such a look as if, my God, I'm learning meditation from this man and he's had thoughts of suicide. Because he always thought if you had a thought of suicide, there was something wrong with you. And I just shared, yeah, I've had that thought pass across my mind. But then I shared with him, but it's just a thought. There's nothing wrong with that thought. Many thoughts pass in front of the mind. All kinds of thoughts. But you don't have to believe them. A child runs around when it's 2 years old. You can't stop it. It's its nature. Your mind is designed to think. But it doesn't mean that you have to believe all those thoughts. So by getting in touch with that part of you which is pure and clear, that part of you which is aware, the part of you that doesn't age, the part of you that is always alert, you are intelligence. The mind is not intelligent. It's like the car. The car isn't intelligent. It takes your intelligence to drive the car. But with your intelligence and the vehicle of the car, you can go places. The same with your mind. You are intelligence. You bring intelligence to the mind when you understand how it functions. You are awareness. You bring awareness into the mind. So it's important to know who you are. We started out by asking the question, who am I? Well, now we know. I am awareness. Now, I'm not saying the I am meaning the personality who's speaking to you. I'm speaking of that place inside you. That's what we call the I am. Consciousness is the I am. Awareness is that I am. So it's time. It's time for us all to understand how to use our mind effectively, the way it was designed to be used. The mind connects to the body, connects to the senses, and gathers information and uses that information. What a wonderful life this is. The higher power that designed the vehicle of the mind and body, I just can't believe what a great job it did. Now it's up to us to use those vehicles the way they were designed to be used. We were not born to suffer. We were not born to hate. We were not born to criticize and gossip and put each other down. We were born to know that we are all one together. We're all one family. We're all connected to the same being. And we're here to express love, express that divine wisdom, intelligence, and harmony and peace. We're here, it's our birthright to experience the joy of our true essential nature. So use your mind. Go out into the world now and enjoy it. But be careful, don't believe every thought that comes into your mind. As a matter of fact, don't believe any thought is who you are. Why believe thoughts that will disturb you? You're much greater than that. So please, learn how to step back from the mind. Learn how to meditate. Learn how to get in touch with the part of you that is aware and awake all the time, no matter what the contents of the mind might be. You might lose a friend and your mind will be sad. Well, that's normal. But you will know that you're not the sadness, that the sadness is just a happening in your mind. And if you have a thought that is condemning, it's just a thought. You don't have to believe it. If you have a thought that someone doesn't like you, you don't have to believe that thought and suffer. You can change it. You are the master. You are the one who is in control of the mind. It does take practice, no doubt about that. But take the time, please. Take the time to quiet your mind many times during the day. Take a few minutes. Sit quietly, breathe deeply, learn some relaxation techniques. And then as the mind gets quiet, just take a look at who is the one who's sitting there inside you, complete and fulfilled, aware and alert. And you'll find that it's you. You are that one. and take the time to spend time with that part of you. And I know then that your relationship with your mind will change dramatically. Your relationship with the entire world will change dramatically because you will bring the wisdom and the clarity and the love that you are into your life. Thank you.